My name is Mariana and I'm a program director at Chatteris Educational Foundation. I oversee both primary and secondary school programs. And today we will be talking about social and emotional learning and how to integrate it into your English lessons and into your daily practice at school. Before we begin today, I would like you to take a moment to reflect on your week so far. How has your week been? Please use emojis, no words needed at this stage, just emojis to share your experiences. You can use as many emojis as you want to show the complexity of your feelings. Amazing. I can see we've all been a little on a roller coaster this week. You know, a lot of different feelings, a lot of different emotions. Thank you everyone for sharing. And now I want you to take another moment to think of one positive thing that happened to you this week. What was it? Did you have a chance to catch up with a friend for dinner? Did you have a nice, relaxing evening at home? Did you maybe have an easy day at work? Anyone? Please take a moment to think about this. And again, if you feel comfortable, please do share your reflections with us in the group chat. Right, so no matter how busy you are or how stressed you are, there is always something that can help you calm down, and there is always something positive to look forward to. And right now, I want us to take a look at today's objectives. So in this session, we will discuss the core competencies of social and emotional learning. We will discuss the benefits of this approach for student development. And after that, I'll introduce some simple activities that you can incorporate into your English lessons to promote social and emotional learning among your students. Some of the biggest challenges educators all over the world face are managing student behavior, protecting students from harm, physical, social, and emotional harm, and at the same time, ensuring your students are succeeding academically. It's really important to understand that students need to feel safe, physically safe, and emotionally safe in order to be in the right mindset to learn and to perform well academically. And that's the reason why social and emotional learning is so important. Social and emotional learning is the process through which all people, children or adults, acquire and apply knowledge and skills and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve goals, show empathy, maintain positive relationships with their peers, with others, and make responsible and caring decisions. And now we are going to take a look at the social and emotional learning wheel. So in the middle of the wheel, you have 5 sections, and these are the 5 core competencies of social and emotional learning. We have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And these core competencies could and should be incorporated into communities, into families, schools, and even individual classrooms. And that's exactly what we are going to look at today, how to incorporate these competencies into lesson activities. Numerous studies show that social and emotional learning builds the foundation for thriving in life, inside and outside the school. Children with strong social and emotional skills, they get along better with others, and therefore they enjoy school life more. They have an increased ability to manage stress, which usually leads to just overall better behavior. And more importantly, they're not afraid to try and they're not afraid to make mistakes, which usually leads to improved academic achievements. Whenever I introduce a new approach to my colleagues, to the teachers I work with, they usually say, oh, it's an excellent idea, but I don't have time for that. So it's important to understand that social and emotional learning is not an add-on. And sure, you can see that some institutions run social and emotional learning programs as independent programs. That can be observed sometimes. However, it's important to understand that any teaching and learning is social and emotional. So what teachers say, the values we express, the materials and activities we use for our lessons, the skills we choose to prioritize in our lessons, they all influence how students feel, how they think, how they see themselves, how they interact with the content and with their peers at school as well. So right now we are going to look at these core competencies, at each individual competency separately. I explain what it is, how to explain it to your students, and then we will look at some practical ideas, at some activities that you could incorporate into your lessons. And starting with self-awareness. Self-awareness is a complex term to explain to young learners, for example, but you do have a simple explanation here on the screen, something you could use to explain it to your students. However, the important thing here to remember is that self-awareness is really about trying to understand and know yourself. Yes, so we need to teach students to understand how they feel, to understand what they like, what they don't like, to understand how they like spending their time, what they're good at, what their strengths are, what they're not so good at, what their weaknesses are, how other people see them, right? So all of this helps students really understand, and not only students, help anyone really to understand themselves better. And we will start with feelings. So adults find it difficult to talk about feelings. Children find it even more difficult to talk about feelings. When you add a foreign language on top of that, it's basically mission impossible. So we need to teach students to recognize their own feelings, to identify their own feelings. We need to explain to them that they can feel many different things at the same time. It's not just one feeling at a time. And ideally, be able to communicate their feelings externally as well. But that's an advanced skill. So a simple activity that you could use is this feelings jar, right? So you ask your students, you provide it as a blank template, right? The jar with no colors, and you can ask your students to close their eyes and check in with their own feelings. And then you can ask them to fill the jar with the colors that represent their feelings. Right? And again, they can feel many different things at the same time. So you can include many different feelings. You can put many different feelings in your jar. And this is a first step for students to be able to identify their feelings and visualize them as well as a way to communicate it to their peers and their teachers as well. You don't really need to teach a lesson on feelings to use this activity. You can actually use this activity at the beginning of a lesson as a warm-up activity, let's say, to gauge your students' kind of emotional state at the beginning of the lesson. That can also help you adapt your lesson activities. If you can see that a lot of students in your class maybe are feeling a little anxious today, maybe it was a difficult day for them, maybe they had an exam that morning, maybe you can adapt your activities as well. For that lesson. You can also use this activity at the end of the lesson, for example, to gauge how they felt about the lesson. Did they find the lesson stressful, or did they find the lesson relaxing and enjoyable? The next activity we're going to look at is called My Heart Map. It's a simple crafty activity. We always ask students to introduce themselves, tell us about what they like, tell us about what they don't like. You can ask them to visualize this on this heart poster, and ask them to kind of draw, their favorite things, favorite people, favorite memories, anything that comes to their mind. And again, this is an excellent activity for beginning of the year when you're still getting to know your students. And once you understand your students' interests and your students' preferences, that can also help you cater better to their needs and their interests later in the year. Mirror, mirror on the wall is a perfect activity for teaching students to understand their own strengths and their own weaknesses. This is also an excellent activity to demonstrate to students that everybody is different. Everybody has their own strength, everybody has their own weaknesses, and that is exactly what makes us all unique. So you can ask your students to look in the mirror. If you have one, you can actually bring like an actual mirror or use your phone. You can ask them to look at themselves. You can ask them to draw themselves in the center of this mirror worksheet. And then take a moment to reflect on things they're good at and things, they're not so good at, their weaknesses, things that they can potentially turn into goals for themselves. I think this is an excellent activity for adults as well. So I would like all of us to take a moment and to reflect on our own strength and our own areas for development as educators. I imagine a lot of people joining the session today are teachers or work with students in a different capacity. So for me personally, I think I'm quite good at building relationships with people. I think I'm quite good at building relationships with my students and my colleagues. However, I'm not very tech savvy. And I recognize that I actually need to explore some more tech tools and incorporate some technology into my resources. I recognize that people enjoy technology these days, but I don't normally incorporate much technology because this is my area for development. I want you all to take a moment to reflect on your own practice. And if you feel comfortable, please do share your reflections in the chat box. If you don't feel comfortable, that's also completely fine to keep them private. I'll give you a minute to think about this. Right, and now we're going to move on to the next activity. Again, if at any point you would like to share your reflections, please drop them in the chat box. Moving forward, so we have talked about teaching students how to identify their own feelings, how to identify and talk about their own strengths and their own weaknesses. However, it's also important to explain to students that sometimes other people see us differently. And it's important for students to think about it and think about how other people in their surrounding, in their communities, like their friends, teachers, family members, see them and what they might say about them. Prompting students to think about how other people see them typically helps with improving their behavior. Because that's when they start to realize that other people will, see them differently or may not necessarily understand their intentions, but will only see their actions and will only see their behavior. All right, moving on to the next competency, which is self-management. We often see teachers getting upset when students are not behaving well in class or getting angry sometimes. I think everyone is guilty. I often observe teachers setting rules, obviously, in incorporating incentive schemes or some punishment systems into the lesson routines. But I don't see very often teachers teaching students how to manage their behavior, teaching students what to do if they're not feeling great. Or what if they're actually in lesson and they're meant to be working on a task, but they're actually not feeling so well? So it's important to explain to students that it's okay to not feel great at all times. that it's okay to feel different feelings, but it's also important to teach them how to manage their own feelings and what to do if they're not feeling great, what to do to feel better. And on top of that, it's also very important to teach them how to still make good choices, even on the days when they are not feeling great. And we're going to look at some activities that you can use in your lessons. Starting with this 5-step process, a 5-step mindful check-in. You can ask your students to take 5 deep breaths, then look around, notice 4 things around them, anything really. Notice and say or write down or just think about 5 random items that you can see around. Identify 3 things that they're grateful for. Share 2 positive self-talk statements, 2 positive encouraging statements, and mentioning 1 thing they're looking forward to today or in their lesson or that week. And you can use this activity at the beginning of the lesson, for example, to get everybody to calm down, for example, after recess. Or you can actually use this activity at any point during the lesson. You can pause your lesson and get your students to check in with themselves. If you notice that your students are not behaving well, if you notice that your students are anxious, but perhaps, then you can pause the lesson for a minute or 2 and get them to check in with themselves and get them to calm down and kind of redirect their attention and redirect their energy into a different space. When it comes to social and emotional learning, what I find interesting is that most of these activities can be used with adults too. So actually, I would like us to take a moment to check in with ourselves. I know we've all had hectic weeks. You've shared at the beginning of the session that you've all had different experiences this week, and as adults, we rarely find time to check in with ourselves. So right now is the time. I want you all to take a moment, and I will do it myself, to follow this 5-step process to check in with yourself. Thank you, everyone. I'm personally done with my reflection. Again, the slides will be shared with you, and I suggest that you do it even in the middle of your workday. It definitely helps you come down a little bit and kind of sharpen your focus for the day as well. Fantastic. Let's move on to the next activity, which is self-care wheel. We need to teach students how to manage their emotions, and we need to teach students what to do when they're not feeling great. Well, actually, we can't teach them what to do when they're not feeling great. They need to figure out for themselves what helps them calm down. They need to figure out for themselves what helps them feel better. It's not the same for everybody, so we can't tell them exactly what to do in such cases. But we can work together with them to help them discover those things, right? So this can be a whole class activity where everybody shares ideas and you put together one big self-care wheel, and you can even put it on the wall in your classroom. And then at some point during the lesson, if you see that your students are feeling anxious or maybe are not feeling great or not behaving very well, you can point to the self-care wheel and take them to take a moment, to pause for a moment and kind of do something to help them calm down and feel better in the lesson. So you can, of course, change the segments and the sections, but here I have provided a few examples. For example, we could prompt students to think about what to do during the lesson. If they are not feeling great during the lesson, what could they do? They could, again, maybe take a moment to breathe. They can take a moment to, raise their hand, speak to their teacher, or they can go have, drink some water, or go for a brief walk to the bathroom and come back and, resume working on their activities and their tasks. What to do if they're not feeling great during recess, at home, or when they're outside playing with their friends. Again, this can be a whole class exercise, or this can also be an individual exercise for students to work on based on their abilities, really, and based on the class size. The next task you could use to help students kind of think about their own actions and learn to make better choices is to get them to think about a time when they reacted to something in a negative way or in a way they're not happy about. Get them to think about, a situation in school maybe, or a situation with the teacher, or a situation with their parents, a family or friends outside the school. It doesn't have to be school related, really. And then get them to fill out this brief worksheet as well. What happened? How did it make them feel? And more importantly, what could they do differently next time? No need to collect these kind of worksheets. Again, these are personal reflections. I know that a lot of students don't feel comfortable, sharing these kind of intimate reflections, with their classmates or their teachers. So no need to even elicit their responses. The only response that you could ask them to share is their main takeaways, right? The final section of these worksheets. What could they do differently next time? So you can get, after the activities, or you can get students to share their main takeaways, so we can all share some good habits and good practices and good choices. All right, and we are now moving on to the next section, to the next competency, social awareness. So far we have been talking about us, right? So we've been teaching students how to understand themselves better. We have been teaching students how to identify our own feelings, emotions, how to think about our strength, how to manage our own feelings and emotions. But now it's time to think about how our actions and how our words impact other people. And it's important to teach this skill, because it is a skill. Social awareness is a skill. It's important to teach this to students, to children from very young age, that their actions, that their words impact other people. Their peers, their teachers, their parents as well, and anyone they interact with. So when it comes to social awareness as a competency, we should promote empathy. We should promote deep thinking and analysis of our own actions and our own words. And we should certainly promote respect for all people and respect for diversities in our communities. And let's take a look at some exercises and some activities that we could use. With the first one being perspective taking, or actually think it or say it. So the purpose of this activity is to get your students to think about consequences of their own words. How will my words make other people feel? How will my words make me feel later after I say them? Do I really believe in what I'm saying? Do I agree with what I'm saying? Because sometimes we are saying things that we don't actually believe in. We are saying them simply to support somebody else in a conversation, or just to continue the conversation. Did I actually intend it? Do I actually intend it to say this way? Not only the words, but what about my facial expression, my intonation, my body language? And then as an exercise, you can prepare some simple statements, and then you can ask students to sort them, right? It's a sorting exercise. Is it something that you can just say without thinking? Or is it something that you should think about before saying? For example, you look weird in your glasses, right? Imagine your classmate shows up to school wearing glasses, but they haven't worn glasses before. And in your head, you want to say, oh, you look weird in those glasses. And then before students say it, we need to get them to think about, is it something you should just say? Or is it something you should think about first before saying and maybe change what or how you say it? So prompting students to think about the consequences of their words is extremely important. Empathy is something we need to teach students as well. Feeling empathy and showing empathy to other people. It's important to teach students that you can even show empathy and feel empathy for someone you disagree with. You can even feel empathy for somebody you don't know that well, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be your close friend to feel empathy for. You can even feel empathy for people you don't know at all. Sometimes I read a newspaper article or a social media post about somebody and I feel empathy for them, right? For the situation that they're in. So we need to teach students, what empathy is, so this is when you try to understand how somebody else feels, right? You try to understand not what you feel about the situation, but how they feel. And to do that, to practice that skill, you could prepare some scenarios, potentially involving people they know, potentially real life scenarios, maybe something you've witnessed, at a school, for example. And then you can ask your students to read those scenarios, think about what the main characters in those scenarios feel, right? And that way we can kind of prompt students to think about other people's feelings as well. All right, moving on to problem solving as another activity focusing on raising social awareness, right? So we can ask students to think of 3 problems in their town, in school, or just among their friends. It doesn't really matter. But we want them to be able to identify problems and issues that exist in their communities. And more importantly, we want them to be able to provide some solutions. Of course, as I don't know, a 10 or 15-year-old student, they may not have, many realistic or feasible solutions to propose, but they'll have something. Everybody can do something. Everybody can contribute. Doesn't matter how big or how global the problem is that we are talking about. So get your students to think of some issues that they've noticed. Again, even if these are small things among friends, right? And more importantly, get them to think about how they can help, how they personally can help, what small things they can do to contribute to solving that issue or to help that other person who is experiencing that issue feel better. All right. And we are moving to the fourth competency, which is relationship skills. So we need to teach students to build positive and caring relationships with their peers, with their teachers, with their parents as well. So it's important to teach students how to build positive relationships. Things like how to disagree in a friendly way, for example. How to be respectful when we communicate, with people. How to show to people that we care about them, right? All of these habits and all of these skills will help your students learn how to build more positive relationships with people around them. Right, and let's take a look at some activities, starting with something very simple, right? So get your students to think about people they interact with often and think about how these people show that they care about them. Their parents, their teachers, their friends. What do these people do to show that they care? Or you can flip it as well, and you can ask your students to think about how they show to all of these people in their surrounding that they care about them. So hopefully this will raise the awareness that to build positive relationship, you do need to show to people that you care. Not only that you need to care, but that's something that's inside you. Other people may not know how you feel about them, but it's important to show them that you care. All right, moving on to compliments and notes of kindness. Well, first we would need to teach students what a compliment is, right? A compliment is a polite remark you give to someone to show that you appreciate their appearance, their qualities, or their actions. A kind remark is something very similar, but it's a little bit more general, right? It's a comment, about anything really that can make someone else feel good. So you could provide some examples, of compliments and kind remarks, or you could turn it into an activity, right? Ask your students to write a compliment or a note of kindness for the person sitting next to them on a piece of paper. And then once they're done, ask them to exchange their notes of kindness. Ask them to be genuine, to be brief, they don't have to write a lot. Sometimes one phrase and one simple statement can really make a difference for somebody you're close friends with or somebody you interact on a daily basis. And we as adults, I think, are guilty as well. And I don't think I personally compliment people I interact with on a daily basis often enough. I personally don't think I make many kind remarks to my colleagues or even my family, my close family and friends, and I think I should do it more often. So again, I want to use this webinar as an opportunity for you to reflect as well, right? Because if you yourself believe in importance of these social and emotional skills, then you will be able to promote them among your students and among your colleagues as well. So another moment for reflection for all of us, I want you to think of a colleague that you work with closely. Maybe somebody you co-teach with, maybe somebody you sit next to in a teacher's room. And I want you to think of a compliment or a kind remark that you would like to tell them. You can even write them. You can even write it down if you want to. And after that, if you're comfortable, just message them. You can just message them and tell them, I appreciate your support with the student activity earlier today or earlier this week, or I appreciate that you're always positive and you're always smiling. It's a pleasure to work with you, on a daily basis. If you don't feel comfortable sending a message right now, that's completely fine. But do consider sharing it, the next time you see them at work. And we should really do the same with people outside of work too, with our friends and our families. As I said, it's not social and emotional learning. It is considered a teaching approach, an education strategy, but actually I think it's a strategy that adults need some reminders every now and then of as well. All right, let's just take a moment to reflect on this, and I'll take a moment to reflect as well, and then we will move on to the next activity. Excellent. All right, let's move on to the next activity, the next example. And this one is called We Are Different. We need to teach students that everybody is different. When it comes to our strengths and weaknesses, but just in general, it's not just appearance. Every person is unique. We have different hobbies, different skills, different preferences. We look different, we feel different things. You know, the same situation may be a reason for anxiety for one person, but may not necessarily be an issue for another. We feel different things as well. And it's important to teach students that we don't have to be the same to be friends, that you can be friends with people who are different. Actually, some of my friends are complete extremes from my personality, and I'm still very good friends with them. So for this activity, we want to encourage students to actually think of differences between themselves and their friends. I would say very often when we teach lessons on friendships or relationships, we encourage students to think about how they're similar with their friends, or what they like doing with their friends, what kind of things they enjoy doing together with their friends. But for the purpose of this activity, we want to encourage students to think about the differences between themselves and their friends. All right, and the next and the final competency that we will look at is called responsible decision making. And doesn't matter how young your learners are, we need to teach students, we need to teach children to make responsible decisions from very young age. And we need to also explain to students that every day they have many options, and every day they have to make many decisions. Who to sit next to, who to sit next to during the lesson or during lunch, who to play with during recess, who to share my toys with, who to work on a project together, etc. So every day they face a lot of choices and a lot of decisions. And it's important to teach students that they need to think carefully about the decisions that they make on the daily basis. They need to think carefully about the choices that they have, that they need to evaluate the choices. They need to think how their decisions will impact them later and how their decisions will impact other people. So now let's take a look at some activities that we can introduce in our lessons. And the first one being tough choices. Again, doesn't matter how young you are, even young students, even primary school students, they sometimes have to make tough decisions, right? At school, in their daily life. So ask them to think about the problem that they faced where they had to make a tough decision. How did they feel in that moment? How did they decide what to do? What did they do and how did they decide it? And then ask them to pretend that somebody decided to make a movie about it. And then get them to be creative and get them to draw a poster for this movie, right? Very simple exercise, but it actually does help students to think about the difficult situations that they face, but more importantly, how they reacted and what they felt and what they did in those situations. If that same situation happened again, would they do the same things or would they do something differently, right? And then you can get your students to share, and you can get them to share their main takeaways and what they've learned from these experiences. Moving on to the next one, forming an opinion. So students are often asked to share their opinions. In school, in lessons, doesn't matter what topic, what subject you teach, we often ask your students, what do you think about this? What do you think about that, right? In their daily lives, students are often asked to share their opinions as well about different things, about what they like, about what they don't like, about what they think about certain matters. So it's important to teach your students how to form an opinion using the pros and cons tool, right? So you can tell them that in order to make a responsible decision, they need to evaluate the pros and cons of the matter, analyze all of the pros and cons that they have, and only then form their final opinion. We need to teach them that if they need to express an opinion on an important matter, they should never just say their opinions immediately. They should think about it carefully. They should analyze both sides and only then form their opinions. And you can really provide any kind of prompts here, any kind of scenarios or questions here. So this kind of activity is easily, can be easily adapted to any topic, any lesson you teach. For example, do you think children younger than 12 should have social media accounts? Should have social media accounts. Make a list of pros and cons to organize your thoughts, right? So they organize pros and cons, and only then you ask them, and now analyze the pros and cons that you have and write your final opinion about the issue. So that's a simple technique that can help children learn, make responsible decisions. Nice. Let's move on. Another technique for making responsible decisions is thinking about the consequences of your actions. So it's very important to teach students to predict and analyze and think about possible consequences to their words, to their decisions, and to their actions before they decide what to do if they're facing a difficult situation. For example, tell your students to imagine that their class took a test, and then most students got 7 out of 10 as a score. And the teacher said the students can retake the test, but if they do, they have to keep the grade they earn, even if it's worse than the first grade that they earned. What would you do? And now ask your students to think of different possible scenarios. Scenario A, retake the test. So they have 2 options here, really, right? So option 1, they can vote to retake the test. And option 2, they can vote not to retake the test. So now get them to think about, if they vote for option 1 to retake the test, what are the possible consequences, right? So for example, if they get like a lower grade, then they'll have to keep it, so they're not going to be happy with that. If a lot of students in the class get a lower grade, they may not be happy, with the people who voted for this option. Or that can be a possible consequence, positive consequence as well, right? If most students get a higher grade, then they'll get to keep the grade, and then everybody will be happy. And then get them to analyze the second option, right? Do not retake the test. What are the possible consequences? And only once they're done with this exercise, ask them to form their final opinion on the matter and make a decision, right? Of course, you can change the prompt, you can change the topic. The best thing to do is to use real life scenarios, of course. If it is a real life situation, in your class, you can even get your students to complete this brief reflection exercise before they vote or before they make their final decision about the matter. All right. Well, that is really it with the competencies. And now it's time for us to reflect on social emotional learning, on the 5 core competencies, and also on the activities I presented here today, and see if you have anything to share. I'm sure you're already using a lot of activities in your daily practice that are promoting social and emotional learning, but maybe you just haven't thought about this, right? So I want you to take a moment to reflect, and this time I would appreciate if some of you could share your ideas in the chat box, or please feel free to unmute yourself as well and share your ideas orally if you wish to. But first of all, take a moment to think about how can you integrate social and emotional learning into your teaching. I know that that's usually the biggest question, and I know I mentioned at the beginning that it's not an add-on. You shouldn't be thinking, oh, how do I find space in my curriculum or space in my lesson plan? Because sometimes you can simply change the format of the activities that you are already doing, right, in lessons to promote some of these competencies. So, for example, if your students have to deliver presentations as part of the speaking lesson, at the end of the presentation, you can ask each student in your class to write a note of kindness with one positive compliment about that student's presentation. This can be anonymous, and then they can these compliments, these notes of kindness can be shared with the presenter. So meaning you don't have to change your lesson plan to incorporate social and emotional learning. These are just small things that you can add here and there, or the format that you can flip a little bit to kind of integrate the elements of social emotional learning into what you already do with your students in your classroom. So I want you to think about it. A, how can you integrate social and emotional learning into your teaching? B, which activities presented today do you think you could use in your classroom? Maybe something stood out to you and you were like, wow, this is actually really interesting, or this is cool. Maybe I will actually try this one activity in your classroom. You know, if after I present all of these activities, you tell me that you may use one, I consider it as a success for myself. So if there was one activity that stood out to you and you actually consider incorporating it into your teaching, please share. I would be curious to hear your thoughts. And finally, can you think of any other additional activities that promote, you know, these competencies of social and emotional learning? Maybe something you already do, or maybe something you've seen other people do, maybe something you heard or read somewhere, but didn't really think about it in this format of social and emotional learning approach. So please take a few minutes to think about it. You can choose any of these questions, and please share your reflections, share your thoughts with us. Amazing. Thank you, Leah, and thank you, V, as well. I have two really good responses actually in the chat box. If anybody else would like to share their ideas, you're more than welcome to do so. So one of the participants shared that they would like to try the 5-step check-in, the 5-step mindfulness check-in with their students. And it's interesting that they've mentioned that they are already kind of incorporating elements of mindfulness in their teaching, but they feel that maybe using the 5-step mindfulness check-in would provide a little bit more structure to the students. And I really appreciate you saying that. And sharing, pinpointing this specific activity, because it's certainly one of my favorite ones. And Leah, thank you for sharing your idea as well, that you will not only get your students to talk about similarities between themselves and their friends, but will also get them to think about differences, which will help, you know, look at differences as a positive thing and promote diversities, promote diversity in our community as well. Even with adult learners, as I said, the funny thing about social and emotional learning and all of the activities that I shared today, to be honest, all of these can be used independently, just for your own kind of to calm yourself down during your workday, to promote your own well-being. This can be used with your colleagues for professional development days. Like again, the interesting thing about social and emotional learning, that it's a skill that everybody would benefit from, not only children, but adults as well. Amazing. Let me move on to the next one. I just wanted to share some resources with you as well. So if you want to learn more about social and emotional learning as an approach and all of these different competencies, the main source is CASEL, Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning platform. They are the ones behind the most commonly used definition of social and emotional learning. So they're the ones who really promoted this approach worldwide. So I usually use it as the main source for even citing social emotional learning for my resources. So I certainly recommend checking out their website. If you would like to explore some additional activities, there are loads of websites, there are loads of articles. I've provided one here. I found this one quite well structured and some good activities there as well. But if you Google activities for social and emotional learning, there are loads of resources available out there. Amazing. And we are basically coming to the end of our webinar. And before we finish, I would appreciate if you could scan the QR code to give us some feedback about the webinar. And also, this is a chance for you to request a certificate. I know that some of you would like to get a certificate of participation in this webinar. So you can request it using this Google form. So you can scan the QR code, or you can also use the link in the GChat. My colleague Margaret Kwan has kindly shared it with all of us in, not in GChat, in our chat here on Zoom.